Hi, thanks for coming. We are going to be discussing the garbage recycling decomposition follow-up that was promised back around about the time I was doing these decomposition experiment presentations in April. I had said, I'm going to do a follow-up. And so this is kind of the follow-up for that. I just recorded a leaf in water decomposition video, and that is on this platform. So please do check that out if you are interested. There is a follow-up for that as well. The experiments went from July 2025 through the present, which is obviously 8/2026. So and definitely check those out if you are interested in that. This is accompanying that, and this is paper stuffs. It was snail mail or food packaging that was collected, and this is kind of how it was presented at the start. This showcases a slide from the first presentation, just straight up directly from that other presentation. And this is how the materials were placed in July of 2025. We had little strips as well as snail mail unopened. So it has, or post mail from the post office. Junk mail. And then also cardboard pieces, from various food packaging materials, plastic from, I think it was an orange juice bottle. And then we took photos of everything over time. And so this is kind of just touching base on how it looked in the middle of the presentation. It did get shoveled and pushed into a snowbank, and so I did have to recover it. Luckily, at that time, the paper stuffs were actually frozen to the cement block that was holding them in place, so they did not get lost in the snowbank. They did not separate from the brick because they had been frozen there. So that was actually luck. But they stayed together, so that made it easier to document over time. But this is kind of how it looked in the winter. As it was shoveled, I did move it off to the side. It was on the patio, and then I moved it to a place in the rocks, essentially beside the patio, where it would not be shoveled. So this is the comparison of where it started to where it ended in that last presentation. So it's still very, very together. Was kind of the overall impression that I had. Was it actually takes a long time for this stuff to actually decompose. There was wear and tear, obvious weather damage, moisture, the moisture damage. But really it was very intact. I did feel it, and it was a little more brittle feeling, but it was not to the extent that it was later. And so that's kind of one of the impressions that I had. It was, the longer it took, the more the decomposition actually took root and actually left that impression. It actually started to break down those fibers, whereas it was still just like the water damage and just very together for that first stretch, the first 9 months or so. But after that, it did kind of start to deteriorate more rapidly, but not in a way that was exceptionally noticeable on the documentation. I do apologize. It is hard to see because these photos are pretty small. I did do a close-up on a couple of them, trying to make the photos a little bit bigger, but there did not seem to be too much noticeable difference over time. These are the bigger photos, just of the more recent decomposition. Since this is the follow-up, the other original information will be available in that other recording, the other presentation. But this is the basic deterioration. Then obviously it transitions. We lost part of the envelope perhaps, or some element of the outside of this envelope over time. I'm not sure what happened there, because we have this QR code there that wasn't in this first photo and then was in this photo for the 7/1/2026. And I will say again, this is outdoors and it's not in a controlled environment. It's just facing all of the weathering of the weather essentially. So it's, I cannot say that this was a controlled environment. I can't say that my neighbors, I sometimes I'll just reference those pesky neighbors might have an interest in science and they might hop over and you just can't rule things like that out. This is the information as I see it, as I have accumulated it, but I cannot say for sure if it has or has not been tampered with, fortunately or otherwise, which I would think otherwise is kind of what we lean into. We want it to be good science and not manipulated science. But these are kind of how it played out. Little difference, arguably. They almost look more worn in the first photo, but then, so that's just unique, I think, how that worked out. And I did actually look at the photos, and from there, it did consistently have the QR code on this envelope. So it must have just lost that top layer, unless those neighbors. We don't know for sure. But this first photo, the outer layer of the closest envelope did come off. And then in this last photo, we do have the middle envelope missing entirely, and I did not see if it had blown around. It was just gone, and so I do not know where that went. But I will say you can also see the little strips of recyclables in this first photo. They're still pretty together, whereas in this second photo, you have a little more deterioration, it looks like. And then this one was ripped in half. Up on the, sorry, you cannot see my pointer. On the right hand photo, the top strip is kind of ripped in half. But you also have a few weeds kind of going up, also growing up, and so that could also affect the chemistry a little bit. And so that's something I'll have to bear in mind for future experimentation. But some of the pieces were ripped up. You can see little white chunks kind of disintegrating next to the original pieces. And so there was some paper stuffs there that did move. So it did deteriorate, it did move, and I cannot say if those darn neighbors got into it, if they did take the sample. I can't say if they ripped that envelope piece for their own data. That could also be a reality. If they, if some folks got into the data collections, I cannot say. So, but this is comparable to reflecting exactly what I saw as it happened. Not a lot in way of some like true noteworthy differences in the disintegration process. But of course, I was very hands off with my analyses of this, my observation. And so I do think texture would play into it. Later, I did start to touch it, because I did check this envelope because I actually was worried about the data security. I was worried about the integrity of the experiment. And so I did kind of pull up the side of this envelope, and I just to double check, because it is a gray envelope. You can see in like the first, gosh, let me find that slide. The cardboard pieces got lost somewhere. I don't know where those went over time, and that must have been, I think, in the winter, because I don't even know if I had those in the photos of the of the other experiment, but we did lose some pieces here and there along the way, and that's something to bear in mind for open air experimentation. But yeah, you can see there was the cardboard, and you can see there is a gray envelope on the end there, and so that was kind of my touch off point of this is the gray envelope. This is the gray envelope. But I did kind of look underneath, because obviously that was a good way to just ensure that it was the gray envelope, and you can see the gray coloring of that envelope, which I think was nice for verifying that as a piece, a data piece, a data segment, I guess. I don't know if we could argue that that's a data segment, but it was good to see the gray color and to be able to verify that consistently. And just because pieces they kept showing up missing without a trace. So I was worried. That's why I brought up my pesky neighbors in the first presentation, and I'm bringing them up again. So so I did kind of start to look at the front, and that is when you can kind of see the edge, the deterioration on the end there, as well as you can see that the front actually did maintain color, and it does appear to have a little more structural integrity than on the back is more sun bleached and more washed out. Obviously, it was a little more exposed to the elements, being on top. It does get that sun exposure and things. Underneath that front, the gray area on this envelope, you can see that bugs had accumulated underneath those roly water bugs. I know that they have a number of different scientific names, or are called by a number of different names. And so growing up as kids, we called them roly bugs. The internet called them water bugs at some point. They look like armadillo bugs. There are a number of different names that I could find on the internet for those. But there were an accumulation of them underneath this envelope. And so you can see that in this, I did start to document that front side of the gray envelope as we were able, and you can see deterioration, maybe a little bit of green along the edges on some of these photos. The photos are small on this presentation again, but I figured that it depends on what screen size you have, if you're able to see the details just a little bit better. Some of them do have some green tinge of some potential microbiota or microbiotic life. Here it started to tear a little bit on 6/24/26. You can see part of the envelope ripped off, and is the lip of the envelope. And then otherwise it's just kind of deteriorating. It's still brittle. I was feeling it obviously as I was pushing it up to inspect below, and so it was more brittle to the touch. It felt like it had been water damaged, and it could break, but there were not enough elements to actually do the job, to actually break it. over time, like there were bugs underneath, there could have been bugs crawling over it, but because they were flat to the ground, there weren't enough stimulants to um, actually rip through the paper. And I was able to kind of lift it. I was careful with it, just for the integrity of trying to maintain it like the other envelopes in the other photo series. So I was being careful with it, but it was brittle and it did feel like it could rip more easily, which was reassuring just because I felt like there was very, very, very little difference in the first 9 months of that damage. So, um, which surprised me because obviously we're looking at, you know, landfills and garbage and things, and those are recyclables too. Um, so you just want to make sure that we are taking care of the planet and we are doing things sustainably, and we want to know our actual systems and how they actually work. So this has been a very cool experiment for that. That is for sure. This is a little bit of the documentation of the strips as a separate entity for the experiment. Just looking at the different smaller pieces of paper, envelopes, things like that. They were out and exposed, then in the snow, but they actually were just kind of grouped into the the photos here. After I did the first presentation, I stopped documenting separate photos of them just because they were all in the full presentation. So we've got those documented, and this is kind of where they started out, and this is where they finished. You can still see we've got the plastic there. I wonder if that one did go missing, just because it that one would not stick with the ice and the snow, I think, because I think that means that some snow melt probably melted into the paper and then froze it to the cinder block. And so I can't verify that this is actually even the original piece of plastic for this. But a very unique experiment there. I was not anticipating doing that. So it was definitely a good one to kind of get the ball rolling in way of recyclables. I think it is actually a pretty standard experiment, but I just hadn't anticipated doing it. So it was cool and very interesting. Definitely good for, burgeoning environmentalists who are interested in helping save the planet. Are there any questions?